right, why don't we'll get started as other people find themselves into Zoom, finish up what they were doing for the day. So first off, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. Really excited for a new edition of TPMA Talk with Paul Teshima, our guest. I think it's going to be a really great conversation. We're going to talk about product market fit, monetization, product and CX leadership, and much, much more. It's going to be a very interactive conversation. So as you have questions, feel free to raise your hands on Zoom, and we'll make sure we get your question right then and there. Of course, you can always add it into chat, and we will also have a question period at the end, but don't feel like you have to wait. If there's something that Paul or I say that sparks a thought, sparks a question, just throw your hand up and we'll get to you. So I think it's going to be a great conversation. It also happens to be our kickoff to the 2021-22 season of the TPMA. So I want to take a couple of minutes while people file in to talk about the exciting things we have in store this season. First thing I want to do is just quickly acknowledge the new faces or the people behind the board. So we have a new board of directors that was established in June this year, and it's got some fresh faces and some familiar ones. We have an advisory board that's been put together by Lee and Mark, and they'll continue to provide their insights and expertise to the board of directors. And of course, I really want to acknowledge our volunteers. As you should know, we're a not-for-profit organization, and so our volunteers are integral to the success of the TPMA. And without them, without their efforts, we wouldn't be able to do the things that we're doing. So thank you to them. And if you're interested at all in volunteering, check out tpma.ca/volunteering. We will be posting information around the programs, the projects, the types of things that we're looking for. But in the meantime, just feel free to leave your contact details. If there's topics or ideas that you have for the TPMA, or if there's areas that you want to be able to volunteer for, you can leave those in the form, or just feel free to leave your contact information. Also want to extend a very big thank you to Lee, Mark, and Karina, who moved on from their positions on the board earlier this summer. For those of you who know Lee, he's been with the board since 2006, and Mark and Karina since 2016. The TPMA would not be what it is today without their efforts. So a heartfelt thank you to them and all the previous executives, officers, volunteers. I think I speak for the board when I say we have big shoes to fill, but we're excited about it. And lastly, a shout out to our sponsors, including our newest sponsor, Yelp. Our sponsors support us in expanding the Toronto product community, and they provide really important resources for programs such as our live events. So thank you to our sponsors. And speaking of events, we have tonight's, of course, but we also have a lineup of events coming at you this year. Here's a quick sneak peek at some of the ones that we've got for October, January, and February. In October, we'll be joined by Heidi Ram for a discussion on product recruitment. Heidi's the head of executive search at Martin Bassett and Associates. And for those of you who may have seen her around LinkedIn, her presence is pretty strong. She specializes in product management and product roles at the executive level, but at various stages as well. Our first event in 2022 is going to be with Ravi Mehta to explore his PM skills framework. Ravi is currently executive in residence at Reforge, but he's previously held key product positions at Tinder, Facebook, TripAdvisor, Xbox. So that's going to be a really interesting conversation. And then in February, we have Christine Atuaro, who will be joining us to talk about all things product operations. So Christine is the Senior Director and Head of Product Ops at Pendo, and she's credited with defining and establishing their product operations organization. So those are just three of our events. We do have them monthly from September to June, excluding December. December is the start of our mentorship program, which I'll talk about in a slide. But look out for more information on these and our other monthly events. And then also stay tuned for some workshops. So we listen to the surveys that we put out and what people, what our members and audience are interested in. And we're going to be rolling out a series of practical workshops that go deeper into the topics that we talk about on the TPMA talks and other events. So stay tuned for those as well. And then, of course, our mentorship program is back. So whether you're looking for guidance on growing your career or you're interested in being a mentor yourself, it's a great program. Check out tpma.ca/mentorship for more information. Registration opens tomorrow. It goes until November 30th. It's a 6-month program, one-on-one mentorship. I highly encourage everyone to check it out. And we're always looking for more mentors. So whether you're interested in the events, the workshops, mentorship program, other initiatives, lots of information should be coming your way. You can follow us on LinkedIn, or there's a subscribe option to just get information on our website. So tpma.ca/subscribe. So the last thing I want to just throw out there is we will, please stick around for our open mic. So again, we're going to have an interactive conversation with Paul. After our discussion with Paul, we are going to have an open mic. And this is something that we like to do to hear about what's going on across the TPMA. So if you have any news, updates, any information you want to share, floor is yours. And after that, we'll open up some breakout rooms for networking. But that said, let's move on to our main event. Again, if you have questions, throw up your hand, we'll unmute you. Feel free to type them into chat as we go as well. All right, so our guest today, I think, is a formative leader whose influence goes beyond organizational categorizations like services or products. Many of you tonight have likely been positively impacted by his practices. I know I have. Currently, he's both the Chief Client Experience Officer at Wealthsimple, leading client success, operations, and portfolio management teams, and he's the head of Wealthsimple Invest. Previously, he was the co-founder and CEO at Nudge.ai, which was acquired by Affinity in 2020. And before Nudge, as a founding member of the Eloqua founding team, he helped the organization grow from $0 to over 100 million in revenue through a successful IPO and a successful acquisition by Oracle for a good amount, for 957 million. At Eloqua, he held the positions of SVP Customer Strategy and Success and later SVP Product Management. Please help me with a very warm welcome to Paul Teshima. Paul, very excited for you to be here. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Rena. This is great. I love product people, so this is going to be a fun conversation. Looking forward to having a good discussion. I've always found that product is such an interesting role. It's so important, so strategic, but half your time you're spending time influencing others to do work versus, getting work done yourself. And so it's just a really, really interesting role.
Excellent. Well, I'll try to ease in there with some of the questions. I say that, but I'm actually going to not. I'm going to jump right in, and I'm going to borrow your own words. So I read something you wrote that said your journey has included 2 successful startups and 1 failure, filled with lots of learning. So let's jump right in, kick it off there. When we look at Eloqua, we look at Nudge, and we look at Wealthsimple. What are the top things you've learned from those experiences?
Yeah, it's a great question. And just for context, there are sort of 3 different versions of like trying to grow a business. Like Eloqua, we were bootstrapped, so we didn't take venture financing until 4 or 5 years in. We actually had to be profitable from the first several years, which kind of set our DNA. And Nudge was the opposite. We raised 10 million US pre-revenue, and had a much different sort of start. And then Wealthsimple, I joined more recently, where they'd just gotten off the very large round, and then we raised an even larger round, close to 750 million this year. And so, sort of at different stages, and learned a lot of different things. I think the first off, and I think probably all of you would already understand this, is like the best part of any of these trying to build any of these businesses are the people that you get to work with and the clients you get to serve and the partners you get to work with. That's absolutely the best part. But if I take a product lens, I think there's a couple things that really come into mind. And I actually dug up an old slide from one of my executive offsites, and Rena, maybe you can like jump over to it. So this was actually our product strategy slide, which tried to anchor the 100, 200 plus engineering product organization at Eloqua when I was running product management, into like what are the things we are going to own and care about, and then how do we create the freedom to kind of build under this umbrella. So if we were coming up with a big sales deal, or there was a trade-off decision on roadmap, it was like, is it in one of these big categories, and if so, run as fast as you can to get it done and iterate. If it's not, move it to the backlog, and let's focus on it later, or look at ways to kind of partner, or maybe even eventually buy if that was an option for us. And so that's something like this. It took us a long time to get to kind of the simple view of what we cared about and why. And there was a lot of supporting documentation. And then we just consistently communicated it over time. So I think the first is like, though this may be an organic process, like figure out your product strategy, constantly test it, but continually communicate it and get the company to buy in so that you can really anchor yourself to that strategy. The second thing I would say, and this is the same, I think, with Wealthsimple and Eloqua, is that when you get to a certain scale, you can actually create an unfair advantage with both creating a data asset that is strategic. As an example, at Eloqua, it was tracking these buyer profiles. We tracked hundreds of millions of buyer profiles, and then building an ecosystem around that data asset that no one else can replicate. It becomes remote. And I'd say that was a huge thing for us at Eloqua, and one of the reasons why we continue to do well at scale. And of course, at Wealthsimple, we have multiple products. We're really better understanding people's finances and how they spend money and how they invest. And again, that data asset's growing and growing as we have more clients, and allows us to build better products and also service you better. And so that competitive advantage, I think, is really, really an important thing for product over time. You either do that, or you got to get like 500 million people to use your product, which is really hard. Those two things.
Just 500 million. That sounds.
Yeah, just 500 million. So it's low bar, but yeah.
So that was Wealthsimple and Nudge. And what would you say? Sorry, Wealthsimple and Eloqua. What about Nudge? What were your primary learnings there?
Well, so I'm jumping ahead to some stuff I may talk about in a bit, but I'll bring it up because I think it's really important. So when you raise 10 million US pre-revenue, although you think you have urgency, you don't have as much urgency. You just don't. Especially if you have a co-founder and CTO like Steve Woods, who wants to build like this perfect product architecture. And so what happens is that you end up building towards your vision, but you don't have the same urgency to get stickiness with existing clients, and maybe even something that's more pedantic, or what I call more like plumbing. And I'll give you an example at Eloqua. I know this is probably a dirty secret. It was probably a dirty secret back then. Now it's fine. It was like 2012. It was like when we went public, only 70% of our clients actually use automation, even though we're a marketing automation platform. So 30% of our clients, at 100 million in revenue, you're using us to deploy, pretty fancy newsletters, and maybe do some lead management. And so this idea that you get everyone to the promised land right away is actually not true. You actually sometimes have to give them some pretty basic, fundamental need to have use cases, and maybe it's not that differentiated, but they believe in the vision. So they're like, at least I'm getting some value as I work my way up that journey to get to the promised land. And I think that I call that the plumber profit model, is like you kind of preach the vision, but you end up still delivering them something that's essential day to day. And that pairing worked well at Eloqua because we were bootstrapped and we had to do the plumbing piece. At Nudge, we took too long to circle back and build the plumbing part. And that's one of the reasons I think we didn't get to kind of exit velocity.
That's really interesting. How do you, and again, I think I'm jumping ahead a little bit too, but maybe one thing that pops into my head is how do you stop yourself from being skewed by the individuals who aren't ready, especially if they make up such a broad customer base, from what you're trying to achieve. When you're innovating and you're doing something different and your customer base isn't ready, how do you stop yourself from giving up on that journey, or validating that it still is relevant?
Well, I do think that you have to have a strength and focus of your thesis of where you think the market's going and why. And I think that there's an element of so there's a gentleman by the name of Mike Maples, who's a VC for a company called Floodgate of the Valley, and I was fortunate to have a call with them. They do sort of seed round, Series A, but he's well known in the Valley, and he gave me a call, and what he said is, I kind of believe in there's two types of startups in terms of how you approach technology. One is where you hire 20 Stanford PhD data scientists and you build something that's no one else can build because they're the best of the best, and you spend 4 years building it. Most people don't take that approach. The other is where you have tailwinds that are actually, it's a market trend that's actually you're riding, that's bigger than your startup, and like it's more like inevitably something's going to happen in this space. Just have I bet on the right direction and path? And because of that, you can to your point earlier, you get pulled slightly towards that direction, even if you're focusing on the day-to-day with clients with tactical things. And so that's why I really believe in like trying to solve a big problem, because usually if there's a big problem, and you've done your research, you've identified certain trends that sort of are driving a need for a big change in an area of business. And for us at Eloqua, it was, information was no longer free. I mean, sure, was no longer, sorry, not free, it was free. Like Google made it free. So so a sales rep couldn't just hold on to information and say, you have to talk to me. And so people started doing their own research and looking at solutions with never talking to sales. And so we had to develop this way for marketing to take more accountability. For Nudge, it was people's relationships became more digital, and it was really hard to track and manage them. But they became more and more important with like LinkedIn. I think I've got 12,000 connections on LinkedIn, and I only know probably 1,000 people. So this idea of like better understanding the network versus just understanding your contacts, I think became important. And then at Wealthsimple, it's access to managing your own finances. Like it's a trend that's going to happen no matter whether Wealthsimple's successful or not.
Really interesting. So I think you've kind of touched on what I'm about to ask you, but that ultimately when you look at the success of Eloqua and the success of Wealthsimple, and even with Nudge, while I know you referred to it as a failure, it still ultimately was acquired by Affinity. So it's still at the end, there's definitely some value that you created there. So when you look at those companies, is there something that you think is a common thread to the secret of success?
There's no question that having a sort of a mission and vision that like your team is aligned with. Like I have this saying, like, especially in product, like hire for motivation and like you can teach skills. Like if someone's naturally really interested in the space you're moving into and where you're going, they're going to be more apt to like really adopt and drive like the additional effort and roadmap that you're looking for, and like be more curious with customers and with sales. So I think that's the one of the big ones. I think the second is that and in all cases, I know this isn't the sexy part of it, but it's like if you just like a ridiculous level of determination. like,
Yeah.
like I think Drew Houston, who's the CEO of Dropbox, gave this great speech at MIT, and he said it started out with passion is bullshit. No one care. It doesn't really mean anything. If you ever had a dog and you go to a park and you start throwing a ball and the dog keeps bringing that ball back every time, you're pretty soon you're like, oh my God, I could throw this 1,000 more times, and the dog would go get that ball and bring it back. That's kind of what it takes to do something big and build a new market or build a company that gets escape velocity. It's that level of like intensity of go get that ball, bring it back. And one of those times something changes, and then you go back to doing it again for like another 100 times, then something changes, and then you keep going and doing it. So I think that's what
patience and perseverance and dedication.
yeah, it's just a different level there. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think started talking about it, but I'm going to jump right into the next one, which is all about product market fit, right? So listening to the market, understanding what customers are ready for, along with what you're trying to do, what problems you're trying to solve. How do you identify and evaluate for true product market fit? Not misperceived, not idealized, or where I want the product fit to sit, but what true product market fit is.
Well, and so I think this is like isn't this like the $1 billion question or whatever? Like how do you get the product market fit? And so I'm going to give you some thoughts of like things that I've learned that may or may not be applied exactly what you're doing. So just take it for what it is. And maybe maybe if you just go ahead to the next slide, Rena, I think this will be helpful as part of it. So, you have this idea, or maybe you've joined a company recently and they're getting some really interest with this unique, maybe if you have a beta product where some friendlies are trying it. And what you're trying to figure out is like, what's this intersection of both the tech that we built, the model you've taken to go to market, and then the experience the client is having, and is that giving you what you need? And there's a great book by Nir Eyal, and I think Rena, you've read it maybe if you go to the next slide,
Yep.
about this idea of like in this day and age, and I call I think it's called and I would call it the consumerization of the enterprise. Like even enterprise software clients have an expectation of use similar to they would in their consumer apps, is like this idea of this hooked canvas. And I don't think you have to read the whole book, but what you're trying to do is create enough value through this cycle of this hook canvas here of like a trigger, an action, a variable reward investment, that the client starts to do more within your product and getting more and more of the cycle, to the point that they actually develop potentially a habit, or you see valuable use cases starting to occur. And I think this is a much different model than, say, maybe we would have done in older days B2B enterprise software, where you sell a year-long contract and you just try and make it work, and you got a year, and that's like more and more pre-SaaS days. And I think what we've gotten more into the model is like really trying to understand this kind of behavior element to start the process to get the product market fit. And I think that's a really important first step. If you go to the next slide, the part that I was referring to earlier, I think is this plumber profit model, is that I really do think that you want to sell and attract people to the vision of what you were doing. But once they're there, make sure you give them something that immediately makes your solution essential every day. For Eloqua, it was making sure if a lead form got filled out, that got into your CRM system, because that was the lifeblood of the sales team. And if that stopped, everything stopped. And the vision was getting to this incredible world where everything's automated and marketers would spend all their time doing things only humans can. At Nudge, and where we got to a little late, and probably for another day, the story of how to do economics on a Series A deal when you've raised that much money is for another time. But our actual hook ended up being automating logging CRM activities. And actually that was actually generating, by the last year, we were actually starting to take off in terms of sales, because even though people believe in this idea of tracking relationships across your business and mapping all these incredible relationships you have to drive business, they cared that their sales team was logging activities automatically in Salesforce and they could track it. That was the plumbing. I'm sure for those of you who work for companies, like that is something your head of sales probably tracks, is activities and calls and whether they're following up on deals. So and that's the kind of the next thing. But then I think I have in the next slide here, Rena. Once you've got sort of the hook piece and you've established some plumbing, is now you're into this mode of like really trying to sense and learn how clients are using your product. Now they're getting to a point where they've adopted something and it's looking like it's a need to have use case set that's driving, taking care of real pain. And you can do client visits and interviews and calls, and you should do that. But there's a lot of early tech adoption. I don't know if people here use Appendo. I know Todd Olson, the CEO there, it's a great product. Or maybe they're using Full Story, but these kind of other tools that let you watch users as they're interacting with your product, and then maybe even discover use cases that you didn't even know were there. And those are sometimes the best gems, and then really start leading you down a path to finding product market fit. And then I think there's a final slide here, that a couple slides from Bessemer, which I really like. Then once you're kind of now, you've got them using some basic things, you see a path to getting more advanced like vision. It's now like, are you seeing that engagement level and is aligned to the direction that you care about in terms of your vision and statement? So they're now using something like, for example, in Eloqua, our first lead nurturing program was one of the hooks that we really got to going beyond just plumbing and getting into like using automation, which was our vision. And once that was in place and we started seeing 10, 15, 20 customers adopted, and it was like now getting easier every time because they really got it. We're like, okay, we're here. This is something we could replicate across hundreds of customers. We now just got to figure out a scale, go to market. And that top quadrant is really a product focus with a customer centric use case. And these other quadrants that Bessemer talks about are where you get into probably problems on the way to product market fit. You're either too revenue focused, you've just deceived yourself in the echo chamber, which unfortunately a lot of times people die in because they just have friendlies and they just convince themselves something works. Or your marketing so strong that people are just really interested in your brand, they download or they use your product and then they die off and never stay engaged. And then I think the last slide here on it is the piece where we really talk about being product driven with a client focus is where the best way we're going to do when that product person doesn't how do I say it, they a great phrase I often use with product people is it's input, not votes. Like the rest of the company doesn't get the vote on where you think you're going and like that thing, but you want to take input from everybody. And so that gets you to that focus plate, that hard place that's hard to see, that sort of fourth quadrant. I know that was a long meandering discussion about it, but like
it's really great. And actually Hooked is one of my favorite books. I think one of the interesting things that we're seeing in product management now is much more focus on the emotional connection. And I think that you've laid down how that emotional connection ties into some more of an analytical element here, right? Because at the end of the day, we need to change. We need to tap into an emotion that we're creating for a user, a positive emotion, in order for it to become cyclical and repetitive. But at the same time, how do you take that emotional element and put it into much more of a analytical, formula driven approach? And I think you've kind of described a blend of approaches that are really critical to the skill of product, really. I know you have one more slide. Did you want me to hit on that?
oh yeah, that's right. So
Yeah.
one more.
Before I do, I want to remind the audience, for those who joined after we kind of got going, if at any point you have a question for Paul, you want to jump in, just raise your hand. We'll unmute you. We want to keep this open and free form, so feel free, or just put it into chat as well if you like. So that going to your NASA. I love this one. Love this one.
Yeah. So people talk a lot about minimal viable product. And I think that kind of, and that's like kind of where you start to get on your way to product market fit. And then I think at product market fit, one of the jobs of the product leader is to come up with what I call minimal viable best practices or minimal viable success stories. So what that is that it's this concept of like when you're talking to clients and you're learning how the product works, is like you got to codify something you see and take a little bit of a leap of faith that this is something that now can be told as a story. And it's not, I like the phrase I like to use, it's somewhat true. Like you've got enough understanding of your domain, you've got enough understanding of your customers and your tech that you know that this is something special that I think that can take forward. And then codifying it as a story and telling it internally into your sales organization is what actually creates the flywheel effect to get more of the same that gets you finally all the way through product market fit, in my opinion. A lot of people skip this step and they just think they've seen it, they know it, but the rest of the org doesn't feel it the same way you do as the product leader. I think this part's really important to do.
Yeah, I really genuinely like, and I think it applies a practical or realism to the way that you approach product management. One of the interesting things I often hear from product managers or the product community is it's hard to get to customers. It's hard to build those relationships. I think we all know that we need to be speaking to clients, to customers, as often as we possibly can, but there's a lot of barriers to doing that. So what do you think is the number one practical way or number X practical ways for product managers to build a better relationship with customers?
And so first I would say, when you say customers, it's I would include customers in the sales side. That's like potential customers. And I would say that probably the thing when I was product leader that I spent the most time was talking with potential customers versus existing. I do find it's actually in somewhat more eye-opening than existing, because you'll get a lot of feedback from existing, but you have to really hunt and find for the nuggets with new, so you need more cycles there. But I would say make some of the CSMs your best friends, and you have to choose the right ones. And you probably all know in your own organizations ones that have an understanding of the difference between just the customer complaining, but or them like triangulating and seeing, a real gap that actually fills a real need that's a value point that's missing. So the first is like get really tight with your CSMs and then get their permission to like engage those clients that they're working with, that they see that triangle approach of like, this is not just a problem, but unlocks actually a series of other value points that we're not using today. Um, a great example for us was at the Eloqua days, we had a an automated program that was sending leads over to CRM. And then what we found was one of our clients was actually using a sort of a bastardized version of some of our processing to actually clean the leads on the way over to CRM, like do some things that our product wasn't meant to do. And one of the CSM said, we should just fix or create some of these steps and make them more productized, so it's not as like 50 jumps through a hoop. And that became what we called our contact washing machine, which was basically a lead cleanser. And that became so successful. When I was on a marketing advisory committee for a company called integrate.com 2 years ago, I heard marketers talking about it. So this is 8 years after I've left Eloqua. They're still talking about using the contact washing machine program. And so that was an example of like a CSM identifying a need that was beyond just like a customer complaining with something they thought really unlocked a whole series of other things, which are all these data automation programs, which we didn't think about. We thought about more automation marketing as like outbound emails.
Amazing. And I think there's a lot of opportunity out there, but how do you then avoid the other trap, which is following the loudest customer, the one complaining, and jumping onto that idea where every idea is the one that's going to be the next productized idea?
That's good. So that's a great point. And I think I would say three things that come right to mind. First is, again, I'll go back to my first phrase of like, continue to remind yourself that this is all input, not votes. So just because maybe you have more customer complaints than you're getting on the sales side in terms of signals, but it doesn't matter if there's 100 of those versus 10 on sales. It's input, not votes. So maybe the 10 on sales gets weighted a lot higher. The second is spend a lot of time in market. As the head of product, I probably did more sales calls than any other executive, both in market and not, and really helped shape the outbound function of like understanding where we should go next, what's strategic, which is what's tactical, and then matching that back to the customer feedback. And I actually think that it's actually one of the challenging parts of this is that, and I don't know, at a certain size of org, there really becomes this outbound product function versus an inbound function. And this is Oracle terms. So, but inbound is more focused on sort of running sprints with the engineering team, gathering requirements, user stories, basically building that factory that actually gets the product out. And then an outbound function is much more engaged with enabling the sales organization and marketing teams, doing comp intel review, getting out in the market and meeting with potential new customers and analysts and other people covering the space. And I think that it's important to develop those two separate disciplines. I've rarely found product managers have both at the same time.
It's the unicorn really of being able to manage all of those. And I think they work well at a smaller organization, to your point of scale and growth, depending on the maturity of an org. But when you get to a point of multiple product lines and hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue and things like that, it becomes difficult to juggle all those. When you talk about staying sales focused, do you think that changes based on the maturity of an organization as well?
Yes, I think after a certain size, your focus that you have, like thinking about more broader what go-to-market plays, I would call them. Like you think about more strategic themes and larger broad swath go-to-markets. Like it's not individual sales deals. It's more like there's an opportunity in mobility because of these factors. For example, how do we want to approach it? Is this a build, buy, or partner? You go through a much more strategic lens view of that go-to-market versus like individual feedback from sales deals. And there's a great McKinsey framework. I don't know if you've heard of it, called Horizon Planning. Those you want to like look it up, but basically after a certain stage, certain product lines get to more of an operational efficiency mode, and you should be, as a product leader, thinking about Horizon 2, which is your next wave. And there's even Horizon 3, which is more your future labs, like kind of view of like what's out there that's even further out from 24 months. And I think that kind of model I like because it lets you apply different levels of thinking to different parts of your business, and make sure that you're not trying to treat everything similar at a certain scale. Like to your point, when you get like 100 million, 200 million in revenue, you can't be treating everything the same in terms of product maturity and go to market.
Yeah, absolutely. Where do you feel when we hear a lot about disruptive innovation, and I think the companies that you have helped drive have been in that space of doing things differently and creating a space. When you think of disruptive innovation in a new or existing company, how do you identify this is a real disruption? What is it? And it's actually purposeful disruption versus that I want to do something differently. And then how do you balance that, or want to do something differently because, right? And then how do you balance that with the existing product demands, the existing client and sales needs out there? There are two questions I do at once.
No, it's okay. I mean, I think, I think there are people, I don't think I'm one of them, that can like truly identify a disruptive opportunity and like they build for it, they know it. And I think that, for me, that's like where you're fundamentally changing the way something is accomplished or the outcomes for the client, whether it's there's a whole brand new role that's needed in an organization, or new economics are being created, like you're disintermediating like brokers or some part in the supply chain, or there's a brand new use case that's never been thought of. I would say that probably for me, my experience was more along the lines of like a random walk through to innovation, where we tried a bunch of things. And then when you look back, it's like, wow, that was really disruptive. But at the time, it was like, I was just doing whatever I needed to do to get the client to do something more or get more value or get that deal done. So I think that the way you balance that versus the needs of whatever is in the roadmap that's like competing against some things that are must-haves, is getting back to that product strategy and vision and making sure you're not compromising or putting yourself in a corner. I'll give you a great example, and this is why you need a really strong CTO to kind of create that tension for you as a product leader. Is like, no matter what we did in the early days of Eloqua, Steve Woods would never let us not stay as SaaS. Like there were so many times, like we started in 2000. This is like ancient history. Like there was like Salesforce and us and a couple others doing SaaS, and there were so many opportunities for big deals where they wanted a licensed version of our software. And Steve said, we're never going to ever do that. I don't care how big the deal is. And so he knew where to dig his heels in, which was a great tension point for me as a product leader. And that even continued all the way through the end, where he knew where to anchor. So I think that tension between your CTO is actually really helpful in that situation.
Brilliant. So we spent a lot of time on product market fit, but it is, like you said, at the center of essentially of product management. And it looks like we have a question here from Abhishek. I'm just going to unmute you. I'm having some trouble here.
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me?
I can. Yes.
We
Perfect.
can.
Yeah. Thank you. Actually, what a wonderful session. Thank you for all the insights and the learning. So, Paul, I have this question. My name is Abhi Gupta, by the way. Paul, I want to check with you. I talk from a different perspective, like from in the early days of an entrepreneur. I believe there's a lot of place for how you take decisions based on your gut and instinct. And then you already kind of touched upon a lot on the customer success managers and the looking at the market and the information and like kind of following the trends and everything, and where the customer success really lies. But that's a lot of evaluation and analysis. So how would you kind of which one would you give more preference, and like how do you go about in that kind of framework?
Yeah, so I think I get what you're saying. You're saying like, how do you, like, if you don't have the time and you're running around, like, how do you decide, how do you know when to make a decision or when to do more work and like take a direction? Is that really the question?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And is it more driven by a gut, or is it like you were always collecting data points and then just going by the decision where the market is heading towards? And
so I always said that the best type of entrepreneur is a perfectionist who always strives for greatness, but can actually somehow manage to deal with the 80-20 decision. And so I think you're always pushing for improvements or looking for a better understanding, but you're never letting time get the best of you, and you're making decisions to try and fast fail and move on. I think that the honest truth is that what killed us at Nudge was time. We took too long. We actually had a great idea. Our nearest competitor now, I think, is just did a round at $1 billion valuation. They just moved faster to an area that they vectored more to the plumbing part first than we did, and we took 3 years to do that and catch up. By then, we were over our tips for skis on our valuation on our round. So I think that I think the short answer is that you need to trust your gut when you've gotten enough that you feel comfortable, but not enough that it satisfies all your needs as a perfectionist.
Right.
And just make a call. It's also helpful, though, by the way, to get secondary and other opinions from people you trust quickly. And that's where having a good board is like often under thought of as an early stage. Like if you have a good board or you have other product leaders you can engage with and get a gut feel on something and you trust them, it can be really helpful quickly to come to a decision faster than doing it all on your own.
I see. And would you actually say, just a quick follow-up to that, is that would you actually be trusting that, like I would say, like the group instinct per se, in terms of where the success of the product lies, or would you actually, like, as an entrepreneur, I believe that we get that kind of always that urge to take the decision. Okay, I know best, right? So
I think you should. No one's gonna know your business better than you. I know I keep saying this phrase, but I go back to that stuff as input, not votes. They're not. And hopefully you have a trusted group of people where they use a founders forum process where they actually don't give you advice. They just tell you a story that may jog your brain into thinking differently. So they're not. I've been on a couple boards before. The last thing you want is a board member telling you, for example, that this is how you should do it. Like I see you 4 times a year, and I read a deck.
Right.
So I think you got to trust your judgment, but it's always okay to be seeking other inputs to understand, and maybe that changes something how you're thinking, or you relate to something you just heard. And like actually, that changes how I think about it. But I'm doing the thinking as a product leader. Oh, I think he's muted again. Abby, I think you're muted again. I don't know how that happened. So I apologize.
Okay, let's see if this.
Yes. Hello. Paul, thank you for that answer. It was great insights. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
So we actually have a question in the chat as well. It says, "Hi, Paul. I was piqued by your focus on creating teams that feel unified by a sense of shared purpose. I understand that for a lot of high growth, for a lot of high growth, a lot of it may be organic and natural. However, can you please share some initiatives that the leadership can take to actually create a sense of unity around a shared mission?" Fantastic question. Shared mission.
That is a great question. So I'll say the first thing that I would say is that make sure that the mission you care about is actually the one that people feel as they do their job day to day. And what I mean by that is, I'm gonna go back to the Eloqua example. Like we would pitch all the time that we're going to create be at a show that you generate revenue for your company, and there's going to be this great ROI in your marketing investments. Like that was our value pitch. But the actual emotional piece was actually making marketers great. And that was actually more important. In fact, towards the end, we vectored a lot more side of modern marketing, creating people, allowing marketers to kind of really advance their career into this next new world of digital and marketing automation, and like sort of become more quant focused. And that was way more unifying than our original kind of more business value prop mission. And so I think the first thing is like, first validate that your mission is something that the people who are actually doing the work actually connect with, or they feel something different as they do their daily work. The second is then, once you figure that out, is really make sure that that is part of your screen and your test for how you hire people, more important than the skills. I've learned the hard way. I think in all my companies, I've hired executives who've done it like 10 times, and then you find out they don't actually they're kind of bored to do it the 11th time. And unfortunately, that's your gig. So you got to kind of like fire for the, I'd rather have someone who's maybe done it 3 times or done it 0 times, but is extremely motivated, loves the mission, wants to really put all in to try and help make your company successful and your customers successful.
And grow as they do.
Yeah, and then there's just a lot of consistent, like down to the words consistency as you communicate your values and your mission and bring unity. That I really am a big believer in, like, those words and how you talk about things matter. And if they vary from executive to executive, and you almost need someone who's like who's militant around that, like, this is exactly how we say it, and this is how we talk about this, and this is the word we use, we don't use that word. And once you get that kind of level of consistency, it can become much more infectious.
Fantastic. So no surprise here. Product market fit is very, very important. Another area though, when we look at product management and growth and success of an organization, is monetization. And whether you're a startup, growth stage, scaling, I think that it's picking the right pricing strategy, the right monetization strategy for your current stage, but also what's going to allow you to open and turn other dials downstream as you evolve as an organization is difficult. What do you think the best approaches are? What has worked for you?
So, and just a little background here. So when I took over product, actually I hadn't even taken over product at Eloqua, but my new CEO at the time, Joe Payne, said he wanted me to take on reinventing our pricing model. We had a la carte pricing model that was very confusing and a lot of charges that clients didn't like. And it was like charging you per emails and this and that and how many campaigns you had and all this stuff. And it was really kind of all over the map. And so I got a chance to do this, and so I got to meet some different people. And like one of the people I met to talk about pricing and pricing strategy was a gentleman by the name of Kendall Collins. He was the CMO of Salesforce at the time. He went on to become like the EVP of Salesforce Cloud. And he didn't have a long meeting with me, but the meeting, I remember the one thing he said was that, Paul, the first thing you should know is, like, if you price something, it gives you an opportunity to have a dialogue with the market. Like, you really, and if you're changing pricing, it also gives you an opportunity. So sometimes doing something bold can actually allow you to have an engaged conversation. There's some caveats to that, which I'll talk about later. And so because of that, we went down this process for monetization. And I think some of the things we learned is that, you want to price something in market, of course, that proxies value to some extent of your clients. And that's hard to do, because the tension against that is you want to choose a protocol that actually also is something they can understand. Like, as an example, most of their competitors priced on emails in marketing automation, but that doesn't proxy value. But to price on leads, which is what we actually generate, qualified leads, people would be like, how do I even know what that is? And so we chose contacts, which was the closest proxy to that. And every marketer knows how big their marketing database is. And so this idea of like choosing a protocol that somewhat proxies value, but then in the sales process is understandable and forecastable is really important. And then the other thing is that we chose, and I think I actually have a slide where I break down some of the different options. I think it's the next one. I'll get back to the slide in a second. This slide, yeah. So it's like, there's, everyone's seen these different types, so I'm not going to go through them all. But I think the idea is that we had a good, better, best option, and a lot of people think, okay, I'm going to have a good, better, best. Whether it's like free, premium, like enterprise, or pro, premium, enterprise. The thing that I learned is that you want to have, maybe you have a protocol, like in our case, again, size of database, or maybe it's users and you have users, but it's always good to have like 2 protocols running at the same time. So in case product tiering is one, and then like another protocol. And the reason is that you're going to get one of those things kind of wrong, or you may get the price wrong, and you want to be able to then play around with the other protocol to deal with that issue. So for example, say you priced your mid-market product, your lower product, you gave too much away. But you had seats as like a secondary protocol. So say you have and you can have up to 20 seats. You can keep the price the same, but drop it to 5 seats. So that dimension is really important to have, because if you don't have that, then you're stuck with actually repricing sometimes, which is actually changing things like feature functions that are in different products. And that's really hard to do. So I know that was a lot there, but I'll summarize, like choose something that proxies value, but make sure that thing is understandable in the sales process. And I would move one step away from value if it's understandable for the buyer. And then add a second protocol, even if you don't think you need it. And even if you want to make it like really like no one's ever going to hit the limit, because you can always bring that back down to deal with issues or errors you may have made in like actually fixing the different product or tiers.
So pricing is one of those things that is unlike a new idea for a product, a new feature, a new product itself, where you can go out and have the conversation with clients, with prospects. Pricing is one of those more difficult ones to validate in market. So is there a way that you can take the multi-protocol tiered approach, however you're approaching your pricing strategy, and do some validation with your market?
I mean, if you're building pricing for a new product or an emerging market, I think it's really hard to do that. And I would never like, I've used pricing consultants before. They're for emerging market pricing, it's just not helpful. If you have a product in market and you want to change the pricing and there's history of pricing, then you have an opportunity to use a consultant or do it yourself to like go and test new pricing. Because you can then you have like something to compare to, and you have a product, and so you can like actually compare like, okay, is this working better or worse with these clients that we sold it this way versus that. But if you don't have anything to compare it to and you're just trying to price a new product, it's just, you might as well just go for it. Just do a little research and go for it, and then use that extra protocol to manage if you made some mistakes, so you can like get the value prop right.
All right, it's a little bit of art and science there.
It's like 90% art. For a new product, for emerging market stuff. It's like, I shouldn't say that. I'm sure there's some more science there, but it's just a lot of trial and error.
One of the things that I know I've experienced, and I'm sure others in product have experienced as well, is you're building a new feature, a new product, and everyone's really excited about it. But nobody wants to increase the fees for their clients, or they're hesitant about adding a new price tag to it, even though there is perceived value. How do you know when to charge for something versus when to roll it into an existing package?
Question. I mean, there's a lot of business metrics around it that will give you a sense of like, do I need to give more value to clients? And hopefully you're evaluating that. Like, am I getting retention issues and other things? But my general mode is to always assume you're giving, like, try and get more value back for that price. Mm-hmm. Let me give you, so a woman I got a chance to have a couple conversations with is Michelle Zaitlin. I don't know if anyone knows who she is. She's the CEO and co-founder of a company called Cloudflare out of the Valley, although she's from Saskatoon. I got a chance to have breakfast with her a little while ago. And Cloudflare is now a $40 billion public company. And at the time, they were like 200 million revenue company, and they have a 4-stage go-to-market, like free, premium, like a team edition, and then an enterprise sales edition. And it's like this dream go-to-market. Oh, all 4 product-led, hybrid, and sales-led. And people are outside in, it looks like this beautiful, like cascading, like conversion factory where it's all, everyone's upgrading, and you're seeing these PQLs pop up everywhere, and then they can become these enterprise customers. And what she told me is that actually there's not that much conversion between the different segments. It actually is almost like just 4 different go-to-markets. But why we do those different prices is because there's value in each of those segments for us. And so so back to your question of like, when should you price something? I'd always lean price first and then get backed off of it. But in the case of going free, you need to be doing free, not for conversion first, but I would say because there's value in itself for those free users being on your platform. In the case of Cloudflare, all these free users are contributing all this like web data, which they use for their security as a service, basically is what they are for all like almost like 50% of the web or something. So it's like these free users would detect all these problems that are out there that they could leverage for the other paying users.
Right.
So in essence, they're kind of paying for that service by providing them this access.
Yeah.
And so And even in that case, that free model for her was still paying in some way, right?
There's an exchange of value for both parties versus giving something away for free.
That's correct. Yeah. And like there are very few B2B companies that have mastered the conversion cycle between sort of different tiers and then justify this free, which is why you see a lot of people moving to like short-term trials and stuff, because they've realized that's really hard to do. But I don't know if that really answered all your questions, but I'd say like price first.
Pricing is a challenging one. I'm just looking at the time here, and Paul, I could probably have another couple hours of conversation with you, but I know we don't have that time. We did have a couple of other topics that we wanted to get into. Before I do, just want to touch base with the group here. Does anybody have any questions? Again, feel free to throw up your hand, and we'll get to you right away again, or add it in chat. And while we do that, while we see if anyone has any questions, I want to jump to leadership, because it is we have a number of members here that that are interested in becoming a leader or are in leadership positions themselves. And I think, you know, you're a leader people love to work for, and people love to be inspired by, and people love to be led by. So I think there's some things there that you can teach us. So my big question would be, when you are looking to move someone into a leadership position, what do you look for in that individual?
Yeah, that's a great. And by the way, thank you for that. That's very nice of you to say. And by the way, Rena, I don't know if maybe you mentioned we got to work together in the past, which is one of the reasons, by the way, I definitely wanted to do this. And so it's great to reconnect. Like for me, like there's a couple things that I think are really critical in leadership. And I just saw a talk from Guy Kawasaki. He was actually at our Wealthsimple retreat. And you said one of the most important things for leaders to understand, and for leaders to understand who are driving growth and product, is like empathy for your client, empathy for the people you work with. Like empathy is like one of the most important skills to have. And I completely agree with that. I think like most 99% of the world's problems in businesses would be solved if you didn't assume bad intent when something went wrong. And if you, because no one wants to do a bad job, so but most people go in assuming that people want to do a bad job, and they try and figure out what went wrong, and with that aversion. And so when I look for people in tough situations, like how do they deal with that situation, how to deal with the people, whether it's a client or with the team member. And so they don't have to be a leader to show me that they have some of those traits. That's the first thing. The second thing is like I really want to see, like I really believe in like servant leadership. So this idea like you really exist only so that your team's successful in what they're trying to do and accomplish, and you take more like a sidecar approach to it versus like a leader top-down approach to it. And so I look for that trait, is like are the people, is that person on the team, again, even if they're an individual contributor, isn't much vested in other people being successful as themselves. And if I see like some of those things, to me, that's a great start to becoming someone I would think about moving into a leadership position. And by the way, in our org, we grew from 73 people in November to 250 by April. So that's 6 months. We tripled the size of the team, and we had to promote like, I don't know, like 15 or 20 people to leadership positions. And so it was like in action just recently in my memory.
Wow, that's growth. That's some serious growth there. Looks like we have a question. I'm going to unmute you.
Yes, thank you again. And again, Paul, this is Abhi Gupta. Paul, I want to check with you now, especially when it comes to like transitioning into leadership. You'd actually mentioned during your talk about one point is that you are looking for people who have the motivation versus necessarily the skill set. But how would you actually hire such people? How would you actually evaluate them to be part of that kind of positions?
I mean, there's a couple things I look for. The first is I just ask them direct questions about like why they want to join Wealthsimple or why they want to join, X, and then understand like, are they running away from something? Are they running to something? And then I kind of drilled in a lot deeper on that area. Like, let me give you an example. When I started at Wealthsimple, and this is not my benefit, this is like the past leader of the CS organization who's still here, this guy Tyler Mima. he used to tell me when I meet with him that he would always do the same thing. Like he would rather hire someone from Starbucks who's had retail customer experience to join our company to being CS versus someone who's been in CS at a bank but doesn't care about customers. And so I interviewed, because it was virtual and because this is the first time I was at a company that I wasn't one of the co-founders, I interviewed, you guys won't believe this, 90 people one-on-ones in the first 60 days. And sorry, I guess it would have been like 73 plus 20 outside my team. But the thing that was common in every single one of those people was that at some point in their life, they'd had something that made them care more about becoming more financially literate. Like that was important to them, whether it was their parents lost their job, or as they were growing up, they had to take out a big loan and pay it down after college. And so this became like an important thing. And so they really cared, they had hardship over it. They really cared that others had a better experience in understanding finances and understanding earlier. So that to me is a great example of like why our team that I work with today is so incredible, is that they all really are motivated to help our clients because of that connection.
Brilliant. Wonderful. Well, we had a few other topics we wanted to get to, but I think the conversation has been very rich. I appreciate the insights, Paul. I'll just check one last time to see if there's any other questions in the audience, and hopefully, we'd love to have you back and have another chat with you to hit on some of the other topics in the future.
Well, thank you, Rena, so much. And I appreciate everyone staying on for this chat, and all the best. I know you're going to breakout rooms and doing some networking. Have fun with that. And yeah, I'd love to come back maybe after we've done a little more, done a couple things, we could talk about sort of some other things that we're learning as we go through that product CX journey.
Absolutely. I think one of the areas that we wanted to touch too, which would be great, especially with your CX focus, is that relationship between product and CX teams. And so, yeah, absolutely fantastic. For the rest of you all, before we jump into breakout rooms, I just want to take a pulse here. If there's anyone who'd like the floor to give just ignore my rapid fire questions for Paul. We'll get to that at some other point in time. But open mic, if there's anyone who would like to take the mic, feel free. I'll also mention we will be sending out a quick survey to get your feedback on the event. Please respond to that. But if anyone would like to announce anything, floor is yours. Just throw up your hand. Okay, we have April. I'm just going to unmute you here. There you go.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Paul. This has been really, really insightful. I'm like an aspiring product manager, and yeah, just trying to break into product without being in a tech background. So just hearing that you're really looking for empathy in those interviews is, yeah, it's encouraging for me as an aspiring product manager to get into the role. I did have a question about how you would reflect that on a resume, since that seems to be like the barrier to entry for someone like me right now. Yeah, any insights on that would be great.
So I could see why. So it is hard to get into a product role straight out without, you don't have product experience, I would assume, right? Is that the case? Sorry, I think you're right. She's off. She's on off.
There we go.
Thank you. No, I do have product experience. So I'm currently in an internship as a product manager, and I'm in an accelerator program for product management. But I think that there's still a block there. Like I'm not getting any traction with my resume. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think so there's two paths, I think, for if there's some reason you feel like there's a blocker as a hiring product manager. Here's what I would say. Like one is actually like in your reach outs or engagement with an organization, like show that you actually do have empathy for that client and how you're talking about the problem they're solving or experience you've had, and really personalize that for them in that interaction, like how you're trying to get into an interview or into a process. I think that's really mindful. Like there are, you know, when I was hiring product, like we would often look at like a marketer who's had zero product management experience, but they've lived and breathed the life of the customer. So they may come in and they would say, you know, I just love so much what you've done. I'd love to perhaps come into this role, and here's what the things I think I could bring to the table. And so that deep domain and alignment of skills sometimes is enough to like give you that edge. The second, which is a way that also works, is you don't start in product, but you start in another area, and then you get an opportunity to move in the product because you're excelling in an area that's adjacent to product in an organization. And so we, for example, at Wealthsimple, I sponsored one of my CS managers to move into a product manager position. They've had zero product experience. And it's because he showed in the role of CS that he had a lot of talents, he had the deep domain and empathy for the client. And I would say that at first the head of product was like, I think he'll be good. But then after like 30 or 60 days, he was blown away with like how much that person helped and knew about the intricacies of how our platform works and the client stories. And so it was really impactful. So those two paths are the ones I think I would try. Although I guess the last one, you have to actually then take a different role that's not product to start, but sorry.
That's okay. Willing to do that as well. So thank you so much, Paul, again. Thank you.
And April, not to promote, but I will promote the upcoming event we'll have with Heidi Ram. We'll be touching on the whole recruitment process in product management, and we'll be looking at a workshop as well that's touching on this particular subjects, because we do have a lot of members like yourself who have some experience looking to grow their experience or aspiring to be in product management. So definitely follow for more.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Olivia.
All right, thank you so much. Hi, everybody, and thank you so much, Paul. It's been an amazing and insightful talk, so thank you. And maybe it's a question for Paul and everyone here, but I did want to kind of talk about storytelling, and I think we've touched upon that slightly as Paul answered a couple of questions today, because I think it was Harley Finkelstein who was quoted as saying, you know, you can have the greatest product, but if you can't explain or if you can't properly tell the story of your product, no matter how great it is, the customers or the users at the end of the day won't benefit from it. And I think a lot of the empathy part plus understanding your end user, that kind of all plays into that. So I wanted to ask you, Paul, or anyone else around how can we, or are there any other resources or things that we can do to become better storytellers, or experiences that you've had that has helped you become or continue to develop as great storytellers?
Great question.
Great. I'm happy to let anyone else answer. I can give you my very short. So I think there's a book actually called Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath that you don't have to read the book. I'm a big believer not reading the book, but read a version of it. And then like really adopt, I know this sounds like wrong, but it's like never let the facts get in the way of a good story as a mantra. I think that you have to, we used to do monthly storytelling sessions actually run by me at Eloqua, which not only helped really hone my storytelling skills, because as the leader, I always had to have at least one or two good stories to fill the uncomfortable silence when no one had a story. But the second part is that it actually really drove the culture of storytelling and the culture of what we cared about, which was like customer success and marketing success. And the reason is that if you tell a good story, people remember it, and that becomes infectious. They can actually retell it. And again, if you follow that framework of Made to Stick, it actually is a really good framework. And then the second part is they get tired of telling your story and they want to go find a story of their own that they own themselves. And so it's this infectious kind of process. So I think the honest truth is just like some practice and a little bit of theory, but it's a lot of practice is really the way to do it.
Amazing, thank you.
Anyone else from the audience want to tap into that and add on? No pressure. All right. Okay, well, if we don't have any more questions or anyone wants to take the floor, I'm happy to open up the rooms for networking. And again, Paul, thank you very much for joining us. I'm gonna open the room now. Just bear with me for one moment.